Welcome to College Admissions Toolbox, giving you the edge you need to get into the colleges of your dreams. With your host, Steve Schwartz. That's me. Today we're talking with Kevin Martin. How are you doing today, Kevin?
Yeah, I'm doing great, Steve. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for being on the show. Now, you've got quite a background. You worked in admissions at UT Austin, which is the University of Texas at Austin. You worked actually inside the admissions office. How did you get into that?
Yeah, it's a funny story, actually. I think a common question amongst other admissions professionals is how did we get started in this job? Because so many parents and students think that if you do X major or area of study, it leads to Y profession or graduate school. And I think it's safe to say that very few of us at the age of 18 thought we would be admissions professionals at the ages of 22 or 23. And my story is no different. When I was at UT, I actually had 3 majors in the College of Liberal Arts. And so I had a very kind of well-rounded education in philosophy and history, sociology, political science. And my area of research was in conflict and genocide. And I actually spent time in Bosnia and Rwanda, which were the populations I was studying. And so that seemingly has nothing to do with higher education. But in my senior year, I got admitted to the Peace Corps and thought I was going to do that. And around March of my senior year, a few months before graduation, I decided Peace Corps wasn't for me. And so I started looking for other jobs and things that were out there. And this job about working for UT admissions popped up. And hey, it sounded pretty cool to represent my university and be a Longhorn professionally. And I had never worked as a student worker like many of my colleagues. I actually didn't know where the Office of Admissions was until my interview day. I actually was borrowing clothes from my who was the business major, and so I wasn't even wearing clothes that were mine. I had an awesome conversation with the guy who would eventually be my boss, had a wonderful first impression of him, and I decided to go for it. And so I spent about 2.5 years working for the flagship university. My professional roles involved reading the essays and the resume and scoring thousands of applications. I worked in about 65 high schools as a regional representative in Dallas, Texas. And overall, it was an awesome, enriching professional experience, and I'm really happy to continue my involvement in the higher education community.
Wow, that's so funny. I'm just trying to picture for a second. You're applying to work in admissions, you're borrowing your roommate's suit, and I can imagine maybe it didn't even fit that well. And now I'm just thinking of all the listeners out there who are applying to college and doing their interviews, and how you've been in their shoes applying for an interview, being a little bit nervous, not feeling fully prepared, but you've got to go for it anyway. So definitely makes me feel like you guys are real people after all, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the most important thing. And it would always, make me happy when students would ask, hey, how did you end up at this role in admissions? And sort of get off the script of, what majors do you have? What test scores do I need? And kind of have those real life conversations. And I think that's really important to realize that admissions professionals are people who have feelings and emotions and families and goals and aspirations, if for no other reason than knowing your audience whenever you are submitting those college applications.
Oh, definitely. Now, I'm wondering, you worked inside the admissions office, Kevin. You said that you reviewed thousands of applications. What are the steps that you take when you go about, reviewing an application? And how do you review thousands when you have such a limited time?
Sure, certainly. I think my average load each year would be, between 800 and 1,000 applications. And so internally, we would start, I would say, in early October and finish in sometime mid to late January, with the bulk of our reviewing being done in December and January because so many students wait till the last minute to apply. And so, we would get the application. The first thing that I would see is the biographical information of the student. We would see their family's income, the student's race, their gender, the educational background of their parents, what high school and city they're from. So that way we have context by which to review their application. Then we would see things like their high school coursework, their senior year schedule. We would see their performance on AP exams. And then going into the nitty-gritty of the required essays, the optional expanded resume that students could submit to UT. We would see letters of recommendation, any special circumstances the applicant wanted us to know about. And so basically anything that they submitted to the office, we would see uploaded as it was sent to us.
So you're looking at all that information. Obviously, these are just the different components. But I'm wondering, what techniques do you use to review them quickly?
Sure. I think the psychology behind it is pretty fascinating because pragmatically speaking, you have to process these applications quickly. And I would probably average 10 to 15 applications an hour. So we're talking 4 to 5 minutes. these are quick reads. This is not a fine-tooth comb process. So it almost becomes like automatic for me, at least. I think everyone has a different experience reviewing applications and files, but I took mine almost as a very mechanical approach, to be honest. I would kind of make certain observations on the context biographical information that would take 10 to 15 seconds. I'd spend, a minute and 30 to 2 minutes on each essay, review the resume, look at any letters of recommendations. So on the low end, an application could take 4 minutes. On the high end, 8 minutes. The student would be assigned a score that was on a scale of 1 to 6, 6 being exceptional, 1 being kind of the lowest score. And that's how it was processed. And so I know every university does it differently. I know some universities, especially the small liberal arts colleges or kind of the most selective schools, will take kind of a batch of applications and all sit in one room and kind of sort it out collectively. But I was only one step in the process. At UT, it was a multi-layered process where each application was read twice, where kind of a senior reviewer would look at what the junior reviewers would do. If there was discrepancy, a third person would read it, and then it goes on to a much more rigorous internal process, especially in January and February, where all of those borderline applications, kind of those students that were on the margins of getting in or not getting in, those would be subjected to additional reviews. And so really, especially at a place like UT, which can be seen as this kind of massive, kind of faceless public institution, we really did take every application very seriously. And that was always the message I would put forth to prospective applicants.
Oh, sure, of course. But I'm just, one thing that I'm sure is sticking out to a lot of our listeners here is, they're spending, hours, days, weeks, maybe even months working on their applications, working on their college essays in particular. But, what you're telling us, which is understandable at a school of the size, that you're dealing with, UT Austin, but you've got you're reading 800 to 1,000. You're spending 4 minutes to 5 minutes, maybe up to 8 minutes on the application as a whole, which means that you just have a couple of minutes for the essay itself. So, you're giving it a lot of detail, you're considering it carefully, but only spending a couple of minutes. I'm sure that to approach it mechanically, you've got to kind of typecast each one or, kind of view it as being within a certain category. I'm sure you come across a lot of essays that seem cliched.
Yeah, I think you hit the correct word there, is a categorization, because at the end of the day, the tool available to me is a score of 1 to 6, with 3 and 4 being the averages. And so, after you do 50 or 100, you come to know very quickly what looks like a 4, what looks like a 5, what looks like a 6. You see those essays that rise above from being cliche to being maybe an excellent essay, and then there are always some essays that are going to rise to the level of outstanding. And those essays are very rare. I would say, only less than 1% of the essays I would read would be what I would consider outstanding essays. And maybe only 10% of those would be kind of excellent or outstanding in the top 10% of all the applications we receive. And so, for that reason, it does become quite easy for me. So that's just my own personal experience. I think every reviewer is going to have a different perspective, but at the end of the day, it is a quick judgment. These are not, excessively thorough reads where an AP English teacher is giving you feedback and making, minute marks on a 10-page research paper, for instance.
Yeah, of course. I can imagine. Obviously, you just don't have the time. So what I'm sure everyone out there listening is wondering is, what makes you pause for a second and say, wow, this is an outstanding essay? What makes them stand out?
Yeah, great question. I think those were the essays that would elevate from a 5 to a 6. Those ones where I would take for a moment and say, wow, this just seems like a really aware, genuine, authentic student who's also writing very well. And so I think to really have that elevation from excellent to outstanding, which is what all these applicants are looking for, it's not just about being a great writer. It's not just about writing your ideas concisely and eloquently. It's about coming off as just an interesting person where I think to myself, like, wow, we really need this student in our community. They would contribute both inside and outside of the classroom. And I think just possess a level of awareness that maybe an adult would say to that student, wow, like, you're really going to go places, or wow, you're really, wise beyond your years. I think that's kind of what captures it in these kind of compliments that those truly outstanding students receive.
Sure. So definitely, interesting, genuine, authentic. That kind of comes back to what I'm always telling students, which is, you've got to demonstrate the ability to reflect that you're a mature individual and you're ready to take on the challenge that is college. Now, I'm wondering, Kevin, are there any examples that come to mind of how you've seen students do this?
I'll have to think. You read so many of these essays. Here's one that I always like to think about. It was a student who was from East Texas, which is a more rural part of my state. the kid, he had an exceptional resume. He wasn't, the national debate champion. He wasn't the best kid in basketball. It was none of these things. You read the essay and you look at the resume and he was involved in his church band. He taught guitar lessons. Was involved in just a lot of different things that he seemed to be genuinely interested in. And it came out in his essays. Like, for instance, a lot of these students will have experiences abroad, or they'll go on vacations, and they'll ask me, how do I package these abroad activities? And I think this kid was really taking it to the next level. He played baseball. He was on his varsity baseball team amongst his other activities. A good baseball player in his own right. But he went on a mission trip to Guatemala, right? These things that many high school students do, where they go for a week or two. And he brought his baseball glove and baseball with him, and was playing baseball with some of the local kids, and they really kind of responded well to it, and went back and he ended up collecting all of this old baseball goods, like balls and bats and gloves and bases and pants and all of this stuff. From his local community in Longview, Texas, and he actually collected enough things where he was able to put it on a trucking container, like the 18-wheeler container, and put it on a ship, and literally shipped this stuff down to Guatemala after he'd raised a bunch of donations from charity. And baseball is a huge sport, for instance, in the neighboring country of Nicaragua and Honduras. And so it's a growing sport in Guatemala. So the student returned back that summer, and for the summer he spent in Guatemala helping distribute all of this baseball stuff, which I thought was just really, really cool. He's like, hey, I see a need. Here's a sport that I love with a community that I'm becoming increasingly attached to. And he just wrote a really thoughtful essay about it. And it wasn't, like the super flowery language, which is busting out the thesaurus, but it just made me, at the end of it, go back and shoot a message to one of my colleagues, like, hey, check out this guy. Like, he seems really interesting from a part of the country where you may not expect this. And, the kid just came off as really interesting. And, at the end of the day, I think a student that I would enjoy talking with, which is the impression I always wanted to walk away with.
Well, totally. No, that is fascinating, Kevin. That kid, really took initiative. I mean, lots of people go on mission trips, but not everyone takes it to the next level and does something extra when they get back home. Not everyone organizes that sort of thing, but you don't have to necessarily, start some major organization or win a huge award to do this. I mean, really, anyone can if they just do the outreach, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But I'm wondering, though, what about people who haven't done some sort of amazing, impressive extracurricular activity where it's fall of their senior year and maybe they're thinking, oh, man, I should have done more, but it's too late now. At a point like this, are there any examples of essays that have come to mind where it's not necessarily about the students' activities? Sure.
I think that question kind of jumps one step too far. I think it's important to take a step back, and one thing I challenge the students I work with now is to ask questions, right? I have students now in my business who will ask me, hey, Mr. Martin, like, I just don't know where to start. I don't know what I'm doing. I haven't done much in the classroom. And depending on the student's context, I'll ask them, 8 or 10 different questions. For instance, I'm working with a student who's a Muslim American, for instance. And he strictly adheres to the principles of Islam. And so I asked him, I'm like, hey, Usman, I was like, let's think about your identity. What's your family's background? Where do you come from? Like, what role does culture, religion play in your life? Is there a particular time when you were in school, when that really came to play? Is that something that, guides you or influences you in the extracurricular activities that you choose? And if so, even if it isn't this kind of competing on a national level, are you doing something in your community that's unique to you? And we, through the process of asking all these questions, he thought about writing, for instance, about his experience with fasting, and fasting in a culture where everybody else is eating lunch and drinking water. And so he really thought about this for a while and decided that he didn't want to write about that, and instead took a completely different direction. And he told me about how he's really good at taking apart and putting computers back together. Which is really cool. And so this train of thought, starting with fasting, led to this idea of him kind of building and repairing computers for his friends and family. He eventually went and worked in a computer store. And it was an experience that he, on a resume, like, doesn't bust out as this, I'm a regional champion of something. But I think in the instance of him, who's applying to be an aerospace engineer, it really was the perfect essay to capture who he is, even though it's something that, at the outset may not have this cachet of being this world-renowned flautist, or I've traveled to lots of countries or things like that.
No, sure, Kevin. I mean, I think you really hit the nail on the head there. It's about, exploring your identity. And then through that process, you can kind of see what's important to you. And then even if you haven't done something earth shattering, if it's important to you and you genuinely enjoy it or care about it, that'll come across in the essay.
Exactly.
Now, I want to shift gears for a minute. And, what we really love to hear on College Admissions Toolbox are stories. So I'm wondering if you could take us to the moment in time of the worst college admissions moment you've seen or experienced. Then we'll kind of delve into some of the lessons learned. Anything come to mind?
Yeah, definitely. This was a very easy question for me to answer. It became pretty legendary amongst myself and my colleagues at my university and my other universities. I'll try and capture the story as quickly as I can. This was right around Christmas time. I remember I was in my house, answering emails. It was a slow time of year. And I get this very odd email. And I don't know what set off a red flag, but it was a girl from one of my elite private schools with a counselor that I had worked very closely with. And it was just strange. It was, hi, Mr. Martin, I'm not satisfied with my test scores. My resume is not very strong. Is there anything I can do to improve my application? And this was like 2 weeks after the deadline had already passed. And so at this point, there was nothing the student could do. But one thing that set me off in the email is that, and this is an argument you hear a lot in Texas, where we have a state law that says the top 10% students in every high school receive automatic admission to public universities. And some people in the wealthier communities that have students that go to more selective, more competitive high schools kind of see this as unfair because, they think if their son or daughter went to a less competitive, less prestigious high school, then they would definitely rise to the top. And so people will say, oh, well, those students take our spaces. And this email kind of concluded with this sentiment. And so I responded. I went and took a shower, kind of took a deep breath, went back downstairs, and I CC'd this main counselor in the email, and I responded. I said, hi, I'm also CCing your counselor just to let you know. And I respond to the girl and I say, there's nothing you can do now. We're evaluating your application. We'll have a decision in late February. And I say, oh, by the way, in the future, you might want to know who your audience is because myself, I went to one of those kind of less prestigious high schools. I come from a first generation college family, from, kind of a working middle class community. And I was like, this, what you're putting across could be a little bit offensive. And so, I get an email back from the girl, and instead of saying, oh, I'm so sorry for offending you, she starts arguing with me, and it's getting really confrontational. Wow. And I'm like, this is the boldest 18-year-old girl I've ever heard of in my life. And so I don't say anything. I just forward the email directly to their head counselor. And I was like, hey, Ann, I want to bring this to your attention. I just let you know the kind of, things your students are saying. And I know that you don't, I know this doesn't reflect on your student body. And I know that, I love the students at your school. They're all very thoughtful and great. And she's like, oh my goodness, thank you so much for bringing this to my attention. And so I go on with my day. I go get a haircut and I come back and I have an email from the counselor and she's like, you're not going to believe this. And I was like, what? And she says, well, we pulled the girl out of class. We sat her down with me and the headmaster of the entire school. And we said, hey, we want to talk to you about these emails you're sending to the UT admissions rep. And she's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I haven't communicated with the UT admissions representative at all. I don't even know who he is. And so that perplexed the counselor and the headmaster. And so turns out it was the dad who was sending emails on behalf of the daughter. And actually, they did a little more digging, and all of the college applications were also sent under the father's email. So, in fact, the father had been doing all of the college applications for this girl. And yeah, it was quite the I'd like to be a fly on the wall whenever they go home for dinner tonight, because the girl was super embarrassed, like crying all day. Obviously gets out on the whole school. It embarrassed the girl, and it was just a real disaster all around.
Oh my God, that is terrible. That poor girl must have been absolutely mortified. Definitely an example of, parental involvement going a little bit too far there.
Definitely.
Wow. I'm wondering if there's any moments, on the flip side that you've seen working in admissions or even afterwards in your private consulting now, any light bulb moments that you've seen or experienced with a student?
Yeah, I think so. We receive a lot of frequently asked questions in admissions, as you know. What grades do I need? What courses look good, etc. But one question I wish students asked me more is, hey, Mr. Martin, should I take a gap year? Should I take some time off before going into university? Or maybe just considering the idea of not going to university at all? Because I think so many students get in this mindset, and their families too, of 18 years old, complete high school, immediately enroll into college, finish college at 22 or 23, and then immediately go to that first job or graduate school or medical school. And I worked with 2 or 3 students that were, high achieving, top 5%, great test scores, well-rounded, got admitted to great universities, their first choices. And I actually had one student who took a step back and said, I don't think this is the best thing for me right now. I think I'd like to do something else. And they actually got hooked up with a program in Mexico that takes on recent high school graduates, and it's sort of like a co-op. You live with a local family, you do sort of like volunteer internship type work, learn Spanish, and kind of have a year between high school and college to explore a different culture, get some language or some professional skills. And universities, love when students do that because, a lot of our processes allow for deferment where a student can defer on to the next fall so that way they don't have to immediately enter in. I mean, I even met a girl back in April who was at my Spanish school in Guatemala, and she was on this program in Mexico, living in central Mexico in Oaxaca, and she had gained admission to Harvard. And she was from rural Vermont, from a high school that doesn't send kids to the Ivy League universities. And she took a step back and said, hey, I think I'm going to do something different. And she was working with indigenous communities in central Mexico, even learning the local language in addition to Spanish. And I think those are kind of my students that are best to work with because they recognize that it's okay to get off that track. And in fact, it might even be better for their long-term prospects and their own kind of personal growth and ultimately get a lot more out of college when they do decide to enroll.
Oh, for sure, Kevin. No question about it. I remember, one of the students when I was in college had taken a gap year to go on a mission trip and had an amazing time. Came back, definitely was a bit more colorful and mature when he came back. And I was actually just talking with a student who is a current high school student, wants to bike around Central America and South America for a year before going to college. And he's worried about it hurting his chances. And I was saying, no, in fact, I think it might even help. It allows you to grow, mature, reflect, all that other good stuff. And I think it's impressive to admission officers to be that courageous and adventurous. It gives you colorful stories. It makes me want to meet you and hear those stories, and definitely makes you a little bit more grounded when you do go to college and to make the most of it. So I agree with you 100%. I think gap years are an amazing concept. I wish they'd been more popular when I was applying. If so, I probably would have done one.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's never a time in your life really where that's not a bad idea. I mean, I'm doing the same thing now. I completed a Fulbright grant last year in Malaysia, and I've spent the last, 9 months traveling independently while also running this business. And so, because I have my own personal decision of whether I want to go to graduate school or not. And just in the last 9 months, with the small amount of money that I've spent on this time, I realized that the world is really the best teacher, and there's so many lessons that can be learned outside of the classroom, truly at a fraction of the cost of what you pay for college tuition.
Oh, for sure. No doubt about it. Now, Kevin, I want to shift gears now, move into my favorite part of the interview, which is the lightning round. Sure. I'm going to ask you some rapid fire questions. You give me some rapid fire responses. Are you ready?
Yep.
Great. What's your number one piece of advice for the college admissions process?
Start early.
Definitely. Couldn't agree more. Could you share with us one habit that you believe contributes to college admissions success?
Yeah, I think reflecting on my own experiences applying for the Fulbright grant is have lots of people in your corner or a team to help with those resumes, those essays, and also balance out the roles of where the student can work and places where the parent can help, as opposed to it being 100% the student or 100% of the parent.
Totally. Always helps to have a second pair of eyes looking at it, but you don't want it to go too far.
Right.
What's one online college admissions resource that you absolutely love?
There's a website I came across the other day called payscale.com, and they have a section about return on investment. There's lots of college rankings out there, U.S. News World Report, the World Times. But this one's great because it looks at kind of average debt, average cost, average net cost, and kind of the return on investment for first job, 5 years, 10 years. And it's a great tool to see, exactly what type of investment a student can expect. And a lot of the colleges that are on that list are smaller ones that a lot of parents and students have never heard of, yet they're great value for the money.
Oh, for sure. Totally. Payscale.com. We'll link to it in the show notes. Reminds me of, the classic list, colleges that change lives. Also bringing to light some of those lesser known colleges that can be a better value and a better experience.
Exactly.
What's one book that you believe no college applicant should be without?
I think it's something of a controversial book. It's very important in my own life, and it reflects back to that question of gap year. But it's called The Art of Nonconformity, and it takes a very unconventional approach to life. And it basically flips the entire paradigm of, 18 bachelors, 22 starting medical school, 27 residency. And it really encourages people to reflect critically on formal education, what a college education means, and establishing that, yeah, it's okay to ride your bicycle around, South America if you want to. So it's The Art of Nonconformity.
No, totally. When you talk about your own backpacking and traveling, I couldn't help wondering if maybe you're a little bit influenced by the author of that book. Is it the author of that book, Chris? I can't pronounce his last name, Chris G something. And
yeah, I believe it's Guileboo. Yeah,
Guileboo, and he's making his project to hit every country in the world, right?
Yeah, I think he recently completed that. I think about a year ago. I think he's about 35. He's in his mid-30s. He's not an old guy at all. But
totally.
Yeah, he's definitely an idol of mine.
Definitely. He's a great guy. So tell us a little bit now, Kevin, about your current, practice. You're traveling, but you're also doing some college admissions consulting privately, right?
That's right.
Very cool. Where can folks find you online, and tell us a bit more about what you can do for them?
Sure. So my business can be found at www.texadmissions.com. And drawing on my experiences at UT, my kind of insight perspective on the admissions process, kind of the responsiveness to many of the students and counselors and families that I worked with, I realized that I can provide a high level of service, charging a pretty low rate because I'm single, I'm unmarried, I'm living in inexpensive countries that only cost me $20 or $30 a day. So, especially performing very well academically at UT, I really am an expert on the full process in terms of getting those essays into optimum shape, crafting the best resumes, thinking critically about recommendation letters. I'm also rolling out a YouTube channel right now. I'm specifically covering advice on how a student can make their application more competitive to UT, but also just kind of general life advice about these ideas about debt or taking a gap year. And so I have 4 episodes out now. I have about 8 episodes that my video expert is working on processing right now. And that's information I hope to get out soon. And so it's an exciting project for me because I've never done anything creatively like that. And I love working with students and families and parents. And I think my favorite part about college admissions is that mentorship role where I can encourage students to think a little bit differently than they did before and really take that same critical approach I apply in my own life that I applied in college admissions, and also bring that to my clients and their families and really elevate not only their admissions profiles, but also their personal lives to the next level.
Very cool, Kevin. Definitely, this advising is a lot of fun and it's also really rewarding. But it sounds like, I'm really excited about your YouTube channel, and I'll link to that in the show notes as well. So again, texadmissions.com. We'll link to it in the show notes. We'll link to the YouTube channel. We're really excited to see more great things coming our way.
Hey, Steve, thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us, Kevin, today. Take care.
All right, take it easy.
When I first started working on my applications, I felt like I was competing with everyone at my school. There was this sense that top colleges would only take a few kids from each high school, and it made people afraid to help each other. So I went online and looked at message boards and forums to try and get help from others who were also going through the process. But I felt like a lot of them just had this kind of negative vibe. Everyone's accomplishments seemed more impressive than mine, and the people who posted were just kind of full of themselves. To be honest, it ended up making me feel bad about my chances. Like I didn't have a shot at getting into my reach schools. So over the past few years, I've been working to try and change this. I've built an online forum where people actually help each other instead of putting each other down. And you can get advice from experts who've helped thousands of students get into top colleges. So check it out and feel free to post any questions you have at collegeadmissionstoolbox.com/forum. Thanks for listening to College Admissions Toolbox. Head over to www.collegeadmissionstoolbox.com to get more free tools and resources that will help you get into the colleges of your dreams.